The Edmonton Oilers have a Connor McDavid prognosis. How long will the Oilers be without the best player in the world? And how have they done in the past without Connor McDavid?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
To this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers, I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can enjoy the NFL season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So on today's show, we are going to talk narratively about the McDavid injury. We are going to build off of what we had talked about in the third segment of yesterday's show of how the Oilers can respond to some adversity. We are going to analyze the two serious injuries in Connor McDavid's career, how the Oilers performed during those two pockets of games. And then we're going to tie it all together with a very simple edict about next man up. And I'll start here. Our first segment, we're going to talk about the collarbone injury from 2015-2016, because that's almost a lifetime ago in a hockey sense. You know, the average NHL career is only like 3-4 years long. And that was 9 years ago at this point. Connor McDavid's rookie season, he goes head first. Well, I should say he goes collar first into the end boards against the Flyers, careening injury. He hits his chest, his collarbone here against the boards, breaks his collarbone, misses close to half of the season. And that is not where the Oilers are at now. You have to think about what that iteration of the Oilers looked like, who was on that team, who were the expensive players, who the coach was, who the big dogs were in terms of ice time, because that is not the type of performance in his absence you should expect this time around. And the Oilers are on another planet as far as talent in comparison to where they were in 2015, 2016. I don't want to mince words and I don't want to equivocate, but using history as a frame of reference, that Oilers team that featured Taylor Hall and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, that featured Ryan Nugent-Hopkins as big players, Drasaitl in his second season as an NHL regular, that Oilers team was pretty untalented. It lacked depth, especially up front, scoring depth. It was not particularly talented on the back end either. It lacked a quality starting NHL goalie. And that Oilers team was in the early stages of building. And I understand that you might be asking, well, Nick, why are we talking about that iteration of the Oilers if you don't think they're very comparable? Because I do think it matters from an organizational perspective how you handle adversity. And that is a very different version of the Oilers. And in McDavid's absence, they were not a very good hockey team. And I understand that McDavid was off to a nuclear start as a rookie. But without McDavid, they went 14, 18, and 5. Their most commonly used forward during his absence was Taylor Hall, who had 32 points in 37 games, which is pretty respectable, a little bit above Taylor Hall's career averages. Draisaitl averaged 18.55. He had 30 points in 37 games. Jordan Eberle averaged 18.30 per game. He had 22 points in 37 games. And the Oilers as a team, they had 86 goals for, 108 goals against, on 8% shooting and 91 save on a 910 save percentage. So underlying wise, or I shouldn't say underlying wise, luck wise, the Oilers weren't getting unlucky. They were maybe shooting a smidge lower than you would have expected, but you got to remember the NHL 9 years ago, shooting percentage the league average was closer to 9 than it was 10%, and league average goaltending was about 910 as opposed to where it is now, where it's about 900. So the Oilers were relatively in line with league average, maybe a smidge below in terms of shooting talent, but that Oilers team was never going to be able to mitigate the loss of Connor McDavid. And we're going to start talking about this current iteration right now. And we're going to do the same thing in the second segment when we talk about McDavid's lower body injury in 2019, 2020, where he missed some time in February and ultimately vaulted Draisaitl into the Hart Trophy conversation. But that iteration of the Oilers was not established. And that iteration of the Oilers did not have the scar tissue, and it did not have the requisite experience to be able to handle adversity. You heard me talk about this a lot on yesterday's show. The idea that adversity is an essential component to a successful team, because you are going to come across adversity at some point in your pursuit of a championship, whether that's in the regular season, whether that's in the postseason. You are going to run into problems. It is not going to be a cakewalk. You are never going to, it is never as easy as it seems. You know, you think about the opening scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Harrison Ford's in the temple looking at the idol, and it's just a clear open path. And the guy he's with, Sapito, he goes, "We have nothing to fear here." And Indy says, "Well, that's the problem. We should be." And then he finds the panels on the floor and does the thing with the torch to ignite the panel, and the spears come out the wall. It is never as easy as it seems in anything, in any aspect of life. It is never going to be as easy as it seems. So I think it's really important that the Oilers keep in mind that even though they are missing their best player, and they're missing the best player in the world, and it's going to be a few weeks. Elliot Friedman reported in the ballpark of 2 to 3 weeks. So hopefully somewhere in that range gets him back a little before American Thanksgiving, and it puts the Oilers in a position where they need something to galvanize them. Because right now, and I feel weird about saying this because I'm not there and I can't authoritatively say this, but watching the way they play, the synergy, the connectivity, it is not there. Right now, it looks very clunky. Guys are not forechecking as aggressively as they need to. They are not in position to receive breakout passes in the defensive zone to be able to go to offense. There's just a real lack of cohesiveness that it's hard to mitigate in hockey. And even against bad opponents, even against Columbus, who is not a good hockey team, the Oilers really struggled to string 3-4 consecutive passes in a row together because they did not have the energy. They did not have something pulling them. And now, you never want to see anyone get injured. It is never, ever, ever a good thing, especially when it's somebody as talented as McDavid who gets injured. But you need something to rally around right now. And winning in McDavid's absence, so he doesn't need to turn into Goku when he comes back, that would be a nice welcome back present for Connor McDavid, as opposed to just limping along. Rattle off a nice string of games here. You have ample opportunity, and we said this on yesterday's show as well. Yeah, you still got 72 games, but 72 turns to 60, turns to 50, turns to 15, like that. As you get older, you start to understand just how fast time gets moving. And the Oilers right now have plenty of time. It is not going to stay that way for long. We are going to be talking about the trade deadline in what's going to feel like a blink. And the trade deadline's not till March 5th, and it's not even November yet. The Oilers got to get moving because, as the great Yogi Berra once said, it gets late early out there. And we're going to take our first break of today's show. When we come back, we're going to analyze the February of 2020, where Connor McDavid was out and Leon Drasaitl solidified himself as a Hart Trophy finalist and ultimately took home the award itself. Coming up next after this quick break. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks. With PrizePicks, you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. PrizePicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. Sign up today, and you can get an instant $50 bonus when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. If you were to pull up the PrizePicks homepage right now, you could do whether or not LeBron is going to have more than 23.5 points, if Jason Tatum's going to have more than 28.5 points, if you think Freddie Freeman's going to continue his heater, more than 1.5 hits, runs, and RBIs. If you think their opponents, if you think Juan Soto or Giancarlo Stanton is going to get going as opposed to Freddie Freeman, you could do 1.5 hits, runs, or RBIs for either of those guys as well. So if you want to get in on the action, download the PrizePicks app and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Remember, download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL, and get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out in this Connor McDavid-less Edmonton Oilers window. And let's be frank here. The Oilers are not in a great position. They are 4-5-1 after 10 games. They are struggling to score on almost a comedic level. For a team with this much talent to be struggling to score it's kind of funny. In all honesty, to be 10 games in and have 22 goals scored, to be 2.2 goals per game on a team that is so dynamic offensively, that generates expected goals at such a high rate, that gets high danger chances at such a high rate, to be this inept offensively, it's almost funny. You know, Arvidsson and Hyman still no goals. Skinner has a pair, Nuge has one, Perry, Henry, Connor Brown all have one. But of the Oilers' 22 goals, McDavid and Draisaitl have 9 of the 22. You throw in Bouchard, that's 12. Ekholm, 14. Four players have the 14 of the Oilers' 22 goals. That is not a sustainable goal distribution. Before the season, we went in depth. We dove into what's the most likely outcome for Zach Hyman this season as an Oiler. And we said something in the ballpark of 30 to 35. Now, there are 72 games remaining. There is ample time for Zach Hyman to go on a 15-16% heater for a few weeks and get relatively in line with those numbers. But right now, and I don't know if you know this or not, but if you multiply any number by 0, you get 0 again. So Zach Hyman's currently on pace for 0 goals. I don't think that's going to hold all season. I think the Oilers know it's not going to hold all season, but I think the fact that McDavid is out is only going to intensify the conversation around Hyman about how he played last year, whether or not it was a fluke, if he's a McDavid merchant, if he's a tap-in merchant, if he's actually that good. And I do think Zach Hyman is a good hockey player. I think he's had some decent looks this year, but I think the fact that he's getting more shots blocked than he's gotten on net than he did last year, that would be a real struggle. That's a real struggle for him. And then as far as Arvidsson, I do think people's expectations of him were very wide-ranging, and me included. I wasn't really sure what to expect from him. I guesstimated, I want to say something like 15 to 20 goals this season, and 15 to 20 is relatively in line with his career averages. You figured if he's playing with Draisaitl consistently, he would get that kind of by just simple osmosis, right guy at the right time. You know, the Oilers have put a myriad of a cast of characters with Draisaitl and McDavid and gotten semi-passable counting stats out of players like Zach Kassian, like Benoit Pouliot. I know Pouliot was usually a little bit lower in the lineup, but you got guys like that. You had the James Neal experience, the Milan Lucic experience. They have gotten some counting stats out of less than stellar players. So that leads me to believe that Hyman and Arvidsson are eventually going to get going. But for the main point of our second segment, in 2019-2020, and I do remind you, that season was paused the week of St. Patrick's Day in March because of the pandemic. The Oilers played 71 regular season games that year. McDavid played 64 of them. He missed a game somewhere in the early part of the season, and then he missed 6 games in February. During that window, excuse me, no, I'm thinking of last year. Don't mind me. McDavid missed 7 games in 2019-2020. The Oilers went 4-2-1 in those games. They scored 22 goals for, 19 goals against. In those 7 games, Draisaitl averaged 24 minutes, 41 seconds of ice time. He had 13 points in those 7 games. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins played 24-06. He had 10 points in those 7 games. And that's the kind of performance the Oilers are going to need out of Draisaitl. And that was really one of the first foundational points in the Draisaitl argument. And I know I get caught up in narratives a lot because I like reading. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I do a lot of podcasts. And it was a real point of contention. And if you're a little bit younger, you might not remember this, but from 2016 through about 2021, there was a lot of argument and conjecture just about how good Leon Drasaitl was, whether or not he was a McDavid merchant, whether he was a power play merchant, and just how good of an individual talent as a hockey player he was. He hadn't had that signature counting stat season. He and McDavid had played together so much those first handful of seasons together because the Oilers simply lacked depth. So the logic being you put your two best players on the ice together, you dominate in those minutes, and you hold on for dear life the rest of the game. But once he put together that kind of heater in McDavid's absence, people were able to say, well, if he can do that without McDavid, he's obviously. And Draisaitl is, of course, one of the best players in the world. I contend he's somewhere between 7 and 10, depending on how you feel about other players like Kucherov and Kaprizov. But that absence, I think, is going to be more reminiscent of what the Oilers are dealing with right now. That Oilers team, a little more talented than the one in 15-16, still had Zach Kassian, had James Neal, had Ryan Nugent-Hopkins play. Nuge played the biggest role in his absence, but that Oilers team, again, flawed team, lacked depth, not great goaltending, not great defense. They made the expanded playoff. They, of course, lost to the Coyotes in the expanded playoff, which not great, but that Oilers team was able to survive without McDavid in the regular season. And 3 weeks from the end of October through the middle of November is probably preferable to that time of the season, around the trade deadline, around the stretch run of the season, because so much of that time of the year is about rounding into form and ramping up. And you can't do that without McDavid in your lineup. You can't do that without your best player. You need your best player locked in, hit the ground running as ASAP when it comes to the stretch run of the season, because he plays so many minutes. He plays such an important role. And right now, the Oilers are as prepared to mitigate his absence for 2 to 3 weeks as they possibly could be. This is the most talented Oilers roster in the McDavid Draisaitl era. I have no reservations about saying that. I just don't think there's an argument for any other roster. I know last year's team went to the Stanley Cup final, but during the regular season, McLeod and Fogle swapped for Skinner and Arvidsson. I think most people are going to do that. I think Holloway, for whichever of the replacement forwards you want to say, I think I'm okay with that. And the Oilers do have work to do. Do not get me wrong. The Oilers have a lot of work to do over the next few weeks in McDavid's absence, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that's going to look like and how they're going to go about doing that coming up next after this quick break. So be sure to stay tuned to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. In the NFL this week, the dead and buried New York Jets are hosting CJ Stroud and the struggling Houston Texans. The Jets, 1.5-point home favorites. Surprisingly exciting game. The Denver Broncos heading to Baltimore to take on the Ravens. The Ravens, 9.5 home favorites. My favorite game of the weekend, though. Jared Goff and the Detroit Lions heading to Green Bay to take on the Packers. Big showdown in the NFC North. The Lions, 3.5-point road favorites. And then over on Monday Night Football, we have got ourselves a Super Bowl rematch from a couple years ago. Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers heading to Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. The Chiefs, 8.5-point home favorites. If you want to get in on the action, head on over to FanDuel.com or download the app. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this midweek edition of Locked On Oilers as we navigate the uncertainty of a Connor McDavid-less Edmonton Oilers. And the Oilers recalled both Drake Caggiula and Noah Phillip yesterday on Tuesday. We will see who slides into the actual lineup against the Predators tomorrow for their next game. But right now, and I'm going to go on a bit of a spiel here because I do think this matters, and I do think finding galvanizing forces is an important component. In a very long season, it is easy to get lost in the monotony. NHL players, though they make millions of dollars and play a game for a living, they are still people going to work. They are still labor that is going to work. And we all go to work day in, day out, unless you're lucky and you don't have to work, which in some cases, great. In some cases, oh well. But if you are a person who has to go into work every day, you can find it hard at times to motivate yourself to get in there and get after it. There are some days where you just don't want to do it. There are some days where you just don't feel like you can do it. And in an 82-game season that's spread out over 6.5, 7 months, it feels like there are games that don't matter. Unfortunately, the Oilers not showing up for a game doesn't register in the same way as sending an email tomorrow as opposed to right now, or sending something at end of day on a Friday as opposed to first thing in the morning on Friday so you can get that done. Because sometimes it's 2:00 on a Friday and you just want to coast into the weekend and get out of there. You want to get out of there without having to do a whole lot more. And in the NHL and in professional sports at large, it helps to have those little kicks in the butt, those little motivational tools that athletes use. You know, Tom Brady, the most accomplished football player in the history of professional football, even till the bitter end, his second season in Tampa Bay when they went 7-9 and they barely made the playoffs and then lost to the Rams in the first round. Even at that point, Tom Brady, 7 Super Bowls, I think 3 MVPs, the most accomplished, decorated player in the history of the sport, was still doing the nobody believes in us because it was a motivational tool for him. I'm sure if you frequent TikTok or Instagram or YouTube, you've seen the clip of him at a speaking seminar where he talks about firing himself up, and he gets this look in his eye and he goes, "What'd they say about me? What do they think about me? All right, I'm going to go out there and kick their butts." That's the kind of motivation that some guys need. Other guys need it a little more constructively, where they need, we didn't do this well last game, so let's go out there and do it this way now, and let's try and get a little bit better today. And the beauty of sports, and one of the struggles of sports, is that every player is different. Whatever one tool works for one player might not work for necessarily another player. And in this absence of Connor McDavid over the next handful of weeks, it is going to take an all-hands-on-deck approach. There is no recreating Connor McDavid in the aggregate. I hate to tell Peter Brand and Billy Bean, but we cannot replace Connor McDavid in the aggregate. We cannot find the best player in the world in the AHL. There is no roster transaction that is going to mitigate that. Without Connor McDavid, you are going to have to change how you want the team to play. You are going to have to change the expectations and the responsibilities of what you have on this team. You know, I don't think it's unrealistic to say, well, without McDavid, we're really only going to have one line that's driving play at 5-on-5. We're going to have Leon. We'll probably have him out there with Hyman. We probably put Nuge on our second line with Skinner and Arvidsson. And we try and get by with whatever our third and fourth lines look like, whatever permutation of it with Henry, Connor Brown, Derek Ryan, Corey Perry, Noah Phillip, Drake Caggiula, Vasily Podkolzin, and whatever we're going to do with that conglomeration of players, we're going to try and survive. But we are going to need a more thorough and team-wide commitment to quality hockey. And I talked about this a lot in the postseason last year, that that the Oilers at large play a lot of individual hockey. That it's stretch passes, it's transition, it's high leverage plays. And the teams that thrive in transition are often the most talented. You think about a Colorado, you think about a New York, you think about a Dallas, a Vancouver. Those are high-end, really talented players that have the luxury of playing that way. They are fast enough to skate the puck out of danger. They're talented enough to thread pucks through traffic, through tight windows, in tight windows, and get them where they need to go. And when you lose that, when you lose McDavid's transition skills, you're going to have to fundamentally alter what you want to do, because McDavid's transition game is such an essential component to what the Oilers do. The reason they run a regroup and an organized breakout as opposed to looking for some of those longer passes most of the time is the simple fact that nobody can stop him. If McDavid gets a full head of speed and is navigating and wiggling through the neutral zone, he makes the zone entry by himself. He can wait for Hyman and Nuge to catch up. He can pressure the defense and draw the defense towards him, bait the other team into making a mistake, and then it's academic. That's what makes McDavid so lethal, is that he opens up so much space for other players. And I said this on yesterday's show as well. The Oilers are going to need better defense out of Draisaitl. I understand he is not defensively proficient and he is on the team to score. But right now, with the way the offense is going, with the way the defense is going, the Oilers need more defensively out of Draisaitl, because now, especially without McDavid's line to balance it out offensively, at least in theory, I know they haven't done a whole lot of that this year because the team at large is having a hard time scoring, but without McDavid scoring to buoy whatever defensive woes the rest of the lineup has, that means Draisaitl's got to be better. And look, Leon's got 10 points in 10 games. He's a great player. There is no disputing that. But right now, the Oilers need him to get going. And if that means we're going to outscore our opponents, great. But based on the environmental factors the team is dealing with right now, where they're having such a hard time scoring, have Leon have a little more commitment to defense. A little more 5 in the frame defense would be very welcome. It's an essential component to mitigating talent disparities. You know, you can survive lack of talent if you play the right way. If you fall back on your structure and you keep the good fundamentals, you can mitigate a talent deficit for a short period of time. Over the long run, you're going to lose, but short period of time, if you're out there against the other team's best guys and you're Derek Ryan and Corey Perry, you get that puck in deep, you cycle them for 40 seconds, even if you don't get a scoring chance, you did your job. And right now, the Oilers need more guys that can do their job. But that will just about do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. So if you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you are watching over on YouTube, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Let me know how worried you are about the Oilers without McDavid over the next few weeks. And thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey, become a fantasy hockey expert, and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.